Welcome back to the Werewolf Bar and Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. I'm your host, Brian Easton. That's B. Easton, which is pretty cool, or Mr. E, also not that bad. I'm the author of the Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter series, which you can find on the web at Amazon or werewolfhunter.com or permutedpress.com or any other number of places on the web. We've got a special guest this evening, somebody that I've been trying to get to come on the show for a while now, so you're going to want to stick around for that. But before we get to that, let me just take a minute to talk to you about something that I've been thinking about. So unless you've been in a state that has one of the few states that hasn't issued a shelter-in-place or lockdown order because of the coronavirus, you've probably been in quarantine like I have, living this hermit-like existence like Michael Winterfox. COVID-19 has, of course, affected everybody, and it's got me thinking about diseases as they pertain to monsters. So, vampires to zombies have attempted to be explained through the use of a virus. Makes sense, right? Something bites something else, and it spreads its contagion just like a virus, which helps us to kind of understand how one thing begets another. And I played around with this concept with werewolves back in the early 90s, and I had some unpublished manuscripts where SLJ had to meet the coroner to whom the body of the Saskatchewan slasher had been given after the events of the first book and the downfall of the church saloon there. And the coroner in question worked with the Victorian ring and had done some extensive research into the physiology of the werewolf cadavers that had been brought to him. The slasher kind of just being the latest of these specimens that he had examined in the course of his career. Now remember, in the series mythology, wolves as a rule do not revert to their human state when they die. They remain static in whatever stage of ascension that they were when they gave up the ghost. So I don't recall all the details of the character or his theory, the coroner I'm talking about, but there is a scene in which the character and Sylvester Logan are interacting with one another in the coroner's morgue / laboratory, and he begins a rather tedious scientific explanation as to how werewolves, which he refers to as Homo lupus, spread the disease of werewolfism via an unknown parasite found in their saliva. This parasite, if I remember correctly, this parasite invades the cells of the infected person, and it takes over the mitochondria in the first cells. Okay. And the mitochondria they're the powerhouse of the cells, if my college biology serves. And so basically what happens is this parasite devours the mitochondria and then basically turns itself inside out, regurgitating an altered version of the organelle, the mitochondria. The parasite itself dies in the process, but it goes to seed, so to speak, and these spores invade the neighboring cells. And then they birth a new parasite, and then the process begins all over again. A domino effect which continues and spreads throughout the body in the course of a few hours or maybe a couple of days. And the cells generally lie dormant until pulled at by the moon or otherwise incited by the will of the new host. So that's a kind of a pseudo-scientific explanation at best. But as we know, even this kind of explanation eventually finds the limits of known science. Okay? And there are so many shady components, so many shady variables to this equation as to suggest all kinds of occult theory. And so there's the rub. So it seemed to me, given that I am partial to supernatural agency anyway, that I would rather skip the smoke and mirrors of an attempted biological approach to being a werewolf or becoming a werewolf, and appeal directly to the chambers of the unknown. Now, let mystery be mystery, and leave the scientific approach to the more science-minded, which I'm not too much. I made the explanation before that when a werewolf marks a victim in my series, it doesn't do so arbitrarily or by accident. Now, and when I say by accident, usually what this means is that in popular culture, the victim has survived a werewolf attack, and therefore he'd been bitten, mauled, what have you, but lives through it and then becomes a werewolf himself. This doesn't happen in my books. The werewolves in my series, in the mythos that I've created, deliberately choose their victims for the purpose of marking them. They deliberately dispense a piece of their therion soul, okay, their legacy, as they call it. It's what makes the wolf a wolf in the first place. And so they dispense this piece of themselves, piece of their soul into their victim, usually through a bite, but it could be through the victim like tasting their blood, or it's their flesh or some other part of them. It doesn't really matter so long as the wolf has imbued a part of itself and that part passes into the victim. I want to read something to you now. This is from the UK version of a TV series called Being Human. Some of you may have seen it. There's an American version as well. This is from the British version, and it's regarding a werewolf transformation. Listen to this. He should be dead within 30 seconds. The werewolf heart is about 2/3 the size of a human's, but in order to shrink, first it has to stop. In other words, he has a heart attack. All the internal organs are smaller, so while he's having his heart attack, he's having liver and kidney failure too. And if he stops screaming, it's not because the pain has dulled. His throat, gullet, and vocal cords are tearing and reforming. He literally can't make a sound. By now, the pituitary gland should be working overtime, flooding his body with endorphins to ease some of the pain, but that too is shut down. Anyone else would have died of shock long ago, but it won't let him. And that's the pain I find most remarkable. It drags him through the fire and keeps him alive and even conscious to endure every second. Nothing like this could just evolve. Is it the fingerprint of God? An impossible, lethal curse spread by tooth and claw. Victim begets victim begets victim. It's so cruel, it's perfect. Well, tonight, as I mentioned just a little while ago, we have a special guest with us. Mr. Basil Sands, out of Anchorage, Alaska, is joining us this evening. Those of you who are familiar with my book series might recognize his name as the narrator for the audiobook versions of those books. He's narrated Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter, Heart of Scars, The Lineage, and the first book in the Winter Fox Journals. And Basil is just a master of his craft and consistently delivers stellar performances, especially when it comes to language accents and the delivery of words that I only have to spell and not pronounce. And he just lends so much of his own character to those that I have created that I've asked Basil if he wouldn't mind giving us his own take on the series and share with us a little of his process in bringing the written word to life. So with that, I am pleased to present to you Mr. Basil Sands.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Basil Sands. I'm an audiobook narrator and an author as well, located up in Anchorage, Alaska, at Sandman Production Studios of Alaska, a.k.a. this 4x5 box in my garage. This is where I've recorded well over 100 audiobooks, ranging in genres from thrillers to horror to romance. I've even narrated the entirety of the Bible. And on top of all those, I have narrated the entirety of Brian P. Easton's Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter series, both the original series and the first book of the prequel, Winter Fox, all of which, let me say, are one of the most amazing horror slash monster novels I have ever read. And I have read a lot, narrated a lot of various types of horror novels and thrillers, and this combines all of the best of both horror and thriller, as well as like military thriller and political thriller. And man, this is a good series. You really got to try it out. Now, Brian didn't ask me to come on the show just to come out here and praise his books, although I'm sure he doesn't mind if I do, which I'm gonna, because, like I said, in 12 years of narrating, his series is one of the few that I have called back the author after I didn't hear back and said, hey, you got any more books in that series? I'll narrate them for free. Let's do a royalty share deal, and I'll narrate it that way, because I enjoyed the book so much I wanted to read it myself, whether I narrated it or not. So why not share my experience with all of you guys? So if you go get Winter Fox, that is going to be me sharing with you guys the love of that particular story series. I just I don't know, man. When I narrate audiobooks, I most of the time it's just like, this is a job. I got this book to read. Some of the books that I read, I would have never picked up off the shelf myself, but I narrate them and I do the best job that I can. Some of the books that I read, I pick up and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. I hope there's more in this series. I want to keep doing it. It just really depends on the book. Preparation-wise, one thing that Brian did ask me to do was let you guys know a little bit about the process of how I do an audiobook. I've recorded books, the first 3 books of the Autobiography of a Werewolf series as a contract for Audible. The 4th book, Winter Fox, the prequel, that actually was through our shared publisher, Permuted Press, who publishes both Brian's books and my own novels that I write. I write military thrillers myself. So if you want to pick up a copy of Icehammer, which is my story that follows a family in a Red Dawn type of event that happens up in Alaska, pick it up, find out. They're written by Basil Sands, that's me, and published by Permuted Press, that's them. And anyway, really good book. But Brian and I share the same publisher. And so I narrated his last book through that publisher. And preparation for audiobooks, whether it's a major publisher, a minor publisher, a self-published author, or just my own books that I write and narrate, it's the same. I give the same level of service no matter how much a company is paying me, because it's not just a work of art when you're narrating an audiobook. It's bringing to life someone else's work, putting life in the characters that are written on the page. And so typically the process for prepping a book is the narrator gets it from the publisher or from the author, and we'll read through it one time. Some narrators mark it up and they'll put colorful things in the Adobe PDF. Some will just, kind of commit to memory the characters, the lines, the accents, and so on. And that's basically it. Once you get the idea of how it goes and you get an idea of how you want to voice the characters, you jump right in. One thing with audiobooks, unlike stage or movie acting, there is literally no rehearsal. You get the book, and sometimes you'll get the book, and there's no time even for that first read, to be honest. They'll send you a book on Monday and say, hey, can you start recording this today and have it to us by Friday? And so you're doing your prep as you're reading the book. Some big publishers will do the prep for you and send you a list of pronunciations and so on, but a lot of times that's not the case. I remember a book that I narrated last fall, the Trump impeachment hearings, and I got to narrate a section of that for Congress, and it was incredible. They called us all Tuesday afternoon. There were 6 narrators on this rather large project. Each of us were given about a 4-hour section of the book and said, go for it. And we got called on Tuesday afternoon. The entire book was published and out for retail sale by Thursday at midnight, which that was an incredible turnaround. Did we get to prep for it? Absolutely not. Someone sent us lists of Russian pronunciations and Ukrainian pronunciations, and we had a Ukrainian translator available on a hotline for 24 hours. And yeah, that was it. That was our prep. We jumped in. Luckily, in the case of Brian's books, it was not that stressful. And I really got to do a little bit of prep, which is good. And the reason I say that that was really good was because Brian put an Australian, a New Zealander, a South African, and a British guy all in the same book, in the same conversation. When you're doing audiobooks and you're doing accents, having a conversation, especially a heated conversation, between a Canadian, an Australian, a New Zealander, a South African, a Dutchman, and an Englishman, all in one room, that was not easy. But it was a lot of fun. To be able to fly around with those accents and stuff, that's kind of what I do this job for, to be honest with you. So like I could do the New Zealand accent and get some of that down, and then switch over to the Australian accent, which is just slightly different, and I may not be getting them right now. And then to switch over to the South African accent, which is even more different, and then slide up to, England and up around London, and then switch back over to my Canadian, my natural accent, which actually I'm from Alaska, which our accent's pretty much similar to Northwest Canada. So, to be able to do that in a conversation regularly throughout a book, A, is a little bit stressful, B, is extremely enjoyable. For a guy like me, at least. I really like doing that accent part. Man, his books, I just keep wanting to come back to specifically talking about Brian's book. Because, I've recorded over 100 books, like I said earlier, including the Bible, which I did all in British caricature, or not caricature, characters, because the particular translation I was doing, the John Nelson Darby translation, if you're interested, that particular translation was a British professor of languages who translated that, so I did it all in British. I don't know why I segued into that, but just saying that I have a lot of experience doing accents, I believe. Yeah, that's probably what I meant when I did that. At any rate, Brian's books, whether it was in Central America, in the Caribbean islands, in the Soviet Union, in China, in all over the place, the Middle East, South America, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada, the voodoo doll. I mean, he's got like such a variety of stuff that's coming in and out. And the story is so believable. Absolutely believable. It's incredible. I love this story. One of my favorite characters in the first set of books in the autobiography trilogy, the main trilogy, was Sylvester. One of my favorite characters in that was the preacher, the werewolf fighter who was an immortal guy from the 1600s coming out and preaching. And Brian had actually asked me after I did the first couple of books, where did you get the voice for the preacher? Because I gave him this kind of voice like a southern circuit preacher, like an evangelist doing tent revivals going through the South and preaching the fire and brimstone of God Almighty. That was the voice I gave him, something very similar to that. And Brian was like, where did you get that voice? My grandfather was a pastor and a preacher who did something like that, and you sounded just like him. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy, because my grandmother was a preacher who sounded just like that. I was basically emulating all these various Pentecostal pastors and preachers and evangelists that I had grown up hearing via my grandmother and the various churches we went to. And to be able to put a character, to pull a character like that out of my actual memory and put that life into a fictional character, that just makes the fictional character come alive, seem real, seem historical. And that, to be honest with you, was kind of the feeling I was getting throughout Brian's books, is that I'm not just reading fiction here. This could have happened. This could be historical. His writing is just so fresh, so clean, and so believable. And all of the Indian lore and such that's in there, and the Indian religious lore, there's some of the stuff that's in his books that I had heard of when I was a kid, like the Wendigo. Being a guy who's grown up with a lot of Native Alaskan Northwest stories and legends and so on. that the Wendigo is a thing that I know of. It's, you know, that spirit that can suck the life out of you when you get lost out in the woods and so on. And maybe each different region has a slightly different translation of the same thing. But to be able to read his stories, it was like, oh yeah, this is putting life into some of the legends I heard as a kid from my own relatives, from neighbors, and it's cool. I think you really should get the book if you haven't listened to it already. Now, if you are a fan of Brian's already, then, you know, all I can say is you got good taste. And if you're a fan of his audiobooks in particular, you've got super good taste because, you know I taste good. What can I say? Well, I'm kind of ranting and raving now, aren't I? How much time have I? Oh my goodness, it's getting late. He didn't give me a time limit, so I could keep talking as long as you are willing to listen, but I don't want to bore you because I know, my job is one of those jobs where I sit behind a mic in a little 4x5 booth in the dark by myself for hours on end and basically talk to myself. And, yeah, that's my job as an audiobook narrator. Now, in this time, right now as I'm recording this, we're in the midst of the early part of the coronavirus, the Wuhan virus, China virus, whatever you want to call it. We're in the midst of COVID-19 panicky stupidity at the moment. And so I'm locked away at home. Luckily, my job is such that I work alone in a 4x5 box in my garage most of the time. So I don't have to worry about getting sick because I'd just be coughing on me anyway. Well, my wife and one son that lives with us still. I'll protect them or just avoid them. I'll stay out in the garage. They stay in the house. We're safe. But anyway, in the midst of all this, audiobooks and such are becoming a major, major player because people get tired of watching TV after a while. You got to do some work around the house. Why not pop an audiobook in and listen? And if you want some serious entertainment, pop a good audiobook in, like Brian's books. Or like my own books if you want. Brian, you don't mind if I plug my own books, do you? I hope not. Anyway, yeah, my series Ice Hammer is kind of like a Red Dawn type of story about an invasion of North America. The whole story happens right up here in and around the area of Anchorage and South Central Alaska. Really good series. I liked it a lot. Of course, I wrote it and I narrated it, so why shouldn't I like it? But on the other hand, there are many other good stories out there that, I just love listening to audiobooks, and I love creating audiobooks. Well, anyway, I will say goodbye in this Russian accent, which maybe not actually Russian, may sound more like Ukrainian, because, I'm not actually from Russia. And the many Russians who live here in Alaska are actually, they've been here for many long years and don't have the original accent anymore. So I can't really be around a lot of Russian people who are Russian. They're all Alaska Russian, which is Russian but not from Russia, if you know what I mean. Kind of like I'm Irish, but not from Ireland. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Basil, not only for being with us this evening, but for your kind words about my books, and of course, for waiving your fee to narrate the Winter Fox Journal's Book One. That's just one of the finest compliments I've ever received. You can learn more about Basil's work as a voice actor and an author at his website and other places on the web, which I've got for you right here. And that's going to do it for us tonight here at the Werewolf Bar, my friends. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And until we meet again, happy hunting and mind the moon.